makes Mordor before Sauron? It's a question not many think to ask, but one that opens a strange and shadowed door in Middle-earth's history. When we think of Mordor, we see the realm of the Eye, a desolate wasteland of fire and ash where orcs march endlessly, and the dark tower of Barad-dûr looms against skies choked with smoke. But Sauron wasn't always there. In fact, for thousands of years, Middle-earth existed without his dominion over the Black Land. So what was Mordor before it became the stronghold of darkness we know from the Third Age? Let's journey into the deeper lore of Tolkien's world to uncover what we can truly say about this mysterious realm before Sauron made it his own. The land, without a master Mordor, existed long before the rise of Sauron, defined by ancient forces that shaped Middle-earth itself. At its fiery heart stood Oedruin, Mount Doom, a volcano unlike any other in Arda. What many don't realize is that Oedruin was not Sauron's creation, according to Tolkien's writings in the Peoples of Middle-earth. The great volcano was among the ancient works of Meller, the first Dark Lord when the world was young. And still being shaped, Meller rebelled against the harmonious designs of the other Valar, introducing discord and extremes into the fabric of creation itself. He kindled great fires across Arda, and Eadruin's flames were among these primordial scars. This is crucial to understand. The fire that would one day forge the One Ring was not kindled by Sauron. It was a remnant of Meller's earliest corruption of the world, a fire with unique properties that no forge of elf, dwarf, or man could match. Sauron didn't create this power, he discovered it and recognized its potential in the earliest ages when the elves awoke and began their great migrations. They gave names to the lands they encountered or glimpsed from afar. Mordor in Sindarin means simply black land, Mor for dark or black, and Dor for land. This linguistic evidence presents us with an intriguing possibility the elves may have named thus long before Sauron ever claimed it, suggesting they perceived something inherently forbidding about the region, even in those ancient days. Whether this darkness was purely geographical, a landscape of black volcanic rock and shadowed valleys, or something more spiritually significant, a lingering resonance of Meller's influence, Tolkien does not explicitly tell us. What we do know is that, from the earliest recorded history, Mordor was regarded with caution, if not outright dread, a fortress built by nature. Look at the map of Middle-earth. Mordor's natural defenses become immediately apparent. It is encircled by formidable mountain ranges, the Ash Mountains, arid Lithwi to the north, and the Mountains of Shadow, Ephel, to the west and south. These create a natural fortress with only a few narrow entrances, most notably the Black Gate Moranen to the northwest. There's been speculation among fans about whether Sauron might have raised or enhanced these mountains himself, much as Meller once raised the Thangorodrim or the Valar. He's the Porian Valinor. However, Tolkien's writings give us no definitive evidence of this. The most straightforward reading suggests these mountains were natural features that Sauron later fortified rather than geographical features. He created what makes Mordor's position particularly significant is its isolation from the centers of Elvish and early Númenórean power. During the Second Age, when Sauron was seeking a stronghold, most elves were concentrated in Lindon Irion, and later Lithorian, Alfar. The west and north, the Númenóreans were primarily establishing colonies. Along the western coasts, Mordor, tucked away inland behind its mountain barriers, offered seclusion from watchful eyes. This position wasn't just defensive, it was strategic. From Mordor, Sauron could exert influence in multiple directions, towards the realms of men to the south, and east towards the Elvish kingdoms to the west, and even towards Rohan and the future lands of Gondor to the north. It was a nexus point that allowed him to divide conquer, playing different peoples against each other while building his strength. But beyond its military significance, Mordor held another feature that made it uniquely valuable: its contrasts, a land of sharp contrasts. One of the most overlooked aspects of Mordor is that it was never a homogeneous wasteland. The northwest region around Eredru and the plateau of Gorgoth was indeed barren and volcanic, likely from the earliest times. But the southern plains around Lake Nirnan tell a markedly different story. In this region, 4 rivers converged to form a sizable inland. See, the volcanic soil, rich in minerals, made these southern plains surprisingly fertile. When Sauron established his realm, he created vast slave-worked farms here to feed his armies. But the land's agricultural potential was not his doing. It was a natural characteristic arising from the same volcanic forces that rendered other parts of Mordor so desolate. The Nuin Basin, with its rivers and lake, provided exactly these combination. So before Sauron's arrival, this southern region may well have supported plant life and wildlife. Even if no civilization had claimed it, perhaps it was a hidden valley of green amid the more forbidding landscapes to the north, a place where hardy grasses and shrubs took root, where animals came to drink, and where the occasional traveler might have found respite from the barren highlands. This duality of desolation and fertility, existing side by side, is a characteristic feature of Tolkien's world. Just as the dark forest of Mirkwood had the enchanted stream that caused forgetfulness, or as the dead marshes concealed the remnants of an ancient battlefield, Mordor too contained within it a paradox, a land both dead and alive. Early inhabitants' shadows in the passes. When we search the canonical texts for evidence of who or what lived in Mordor before Sauron, we find very little. Tolkien never speaks of lost kingdoms or forgotten peoples within its borders. There are no ruined cities mentioned, no ancient monuments, no tombs of long-dead kings, as we find in regions like Arnor or the Barrow Downs. This silence itself is telling. It suggests that throughout the First Age and early Second Age, Mordor remained largely uninhabited by organized societies of elves, men, or dwarves. It was a place passed through rather than settled. But one notable exception exists: Shelob, the monstrous spider daughter of Angalant in the Two Towers. Tolkien explicitly states that she was there before Sauron and before the first stone of Barad-dûr. She had established her lair in the high pass of Cirith Ûnal, feeding on whatever unfortunate travelers might attempt the treacherous crossing. Shelob's presence confirms 2 important facts. First, that even before Sauron came to Mordor, it was already home to creatures of malice, beings drawn to darkness and isolation. Second, that there must have been at least occasional traffic through Mordor's mountain passes, enough prey to sustain a predator of Shelob's appetite, whether men, elves, or beasts. Interestingly, when Sauron later established his domain, he did not drive Shelob away or attempt to control her, as Tolkien tells us his cat, he calls her, but she owns him. Not they existed in a state of mutual tolerance, Sauron recognizing that her presence served his purposes by guarding one of the approaches to his realm, and Shelob content to have a steady supply of prey courtesy of Sauron's prisoners and enemies. This relationship hints at a deeper truth, that Mordor, even before Sauron's arrival, was already a place that attracted and harbored creatures aligned with the darker aspects of Arda's nature. It was a refuge for those who thrived in shadow. The choice of Mordor. According to unfinished tales, Sauron began building Barad-dûr around the year 1 of the Second Age. This was approximately 1,000 years after the defeat of Morgoth and Sauron's initial retreat into the shadows. For centuries, he had dwelled farther east in the vast lands of Rhûn, slowly rebuilding his strength and gathering new followers. His choice: move westward and establish his fortress in Mordor was deliberate and calculated. He was advancing his pieces on the board, positioning himself to challenge the growing power of the elves. And the new Manoran's Mordor was not part of his original domain. It was a new acquisition chosen for specific strategic advantages. But the choice went beyond mere geography in Mordor, particularly. In Arad ruins, Sauron found something uniquely suited to his purposes. Here was a fire that contained echoes of his former master's power, a remnant of the primordial forces that had shaped Middle-earth. This was a flame that could be harnessed for works of great power and terrible sorcery. When he began construction of Barad-dûr, Sauron did not need to transform the land around it. The plateau of Gorgoth was already bleak and lifeless, a volcanic wasteland suitable for his purposes. He built upon what was already there, intensifying rather than altering. This is the key to understanding Mordor before Sauron. It was not paradise corrupted, but a land with inherent qualities that made it receptive to darkness. It was a place where Melor's influence had left its mark, where natural forces had created both desolation and hidden fertility, where mountains formed barriers against the outside world. Mordor did not resist Sauron's coming. It welcomed him, the name that tells a tale. Let's return to the name itself, Mordor, the Black Land. The linguistic evidence is worth examining more closely. In Tolkien's world, names are never arbitrary. They carry meaning and history. We know that Mordor is a Sinandar elvish name. This is significant because it tells us that the elves were aware of this region and had given it a name in their own language. But when exactly did they name it? This is where we must speculate, as Tolkien doesn't provide a clear answer. If the name was given after Sauron established his realm there, then Black Land simply reflects the darkness that had overtaken it under his rule. But if the name predates Sauron's arrival, which seems plausible given the elves' extensive travels and mapping during the First and early Second Ages, then it suggests they already perceived something inherently dark or threatening about this region. Consider how other lands in Middle-earth were named Greenwood. The Great reflected its verdant forests. The misty mountains described their cloud-shrouded peaks. Linden meant land of music in Gwen. These names captured essential qualities of the places they described. If Mordor was already known as the Black Land before Sauron, what quality earned it this ominous title? Perhaps it was the black volcanic rock that dominated its landscape. Perhaps it was the shadows cast by its encircling mountains. Or perhaps it was something less tangible, a sense of dread, a lingering shadow of Melor's influence, a spiritual darkness that sensitive elves could perceive. This last possibility aligns with a fundamental aspect of Tolkien's cosmology, that evil, especially Morgoth's evil, had the power to mar the physical world itself. Just as Morgoth infused his malice into the very matter of error, creating what Tolkien called Morgoth's ring, so too might certain places retain a shadow of his influence, a spiritual taint that perceptive beings could sense. If this is true, then Mordor's darkness predated Sauron, not just physically, but spiritually. It was already a place aligned with shadow, not necessarily evil in itself, but conducive to works of darkness. The avoidance pattern, another telling sign, comes from the pattern of settlement and travel around Mordor in the early ages, when the Nummanorans began establishing colonies and trade routes in Middle-earth. During the Second Age, they deliberately chose paths that went around Mordor rather than through it. Even before Sauron built his fortress, the early maps of the Nummenorian mariners show routes that skirt the edges of the Black Land. They preferred the longer coastal routes to the south, or the passes through Rhone to the north, avoiding the more direct path through Mordor's mountains. This avoidance cannot be explained by mere geography. The new Manorans were master engineers and road builders capable of creating highways through formidable terrain. That they chose not to forge routes through Mordor suggests they perceived something unwelcoming about the land itself later. When the Nummenorian exiles founded the kingdom of Gondor, they established a line of watchtowers facing Mordor, the towers of the teeth at the Morin and fortifications like Minas Ithil at the western passes. These were built during a time when Sauron was believed to be defeated. Yet the Gondorans still felt the need to watch the Blackland. They knew, perhaps instinctively, that it was a place that would draw evil again, the whispers of the wild, speculative inhabitants. While Tolkien provides us with limited canonical information about who or what inhabited Mordor before Sauron's arrival, there are several intriguing possibilities. Exploring, some speculate that wandering tribes of Easterlings or Proto-Haredim may have occasionally passed through southern Mordor, particularly around Lake Nunnan, where water and arable land were present. These nomadic peoples might have used it as a seasonal refuge, rather than establishing permanent settlements. The absence of ruined cities or ancient monuments suggests no major civilization took root there, but temporary encampments seem plausible. Another possibility concerns the Druidane or wild, and these mysterious forest dwellers were described by Tolkien as among the earliest inhabitants of Middle-earth. While their known territories were primarily in the forests of Beleriand and later Duardin Forest near Gondor, their ancient migration patterns could have taken small groups through the more habitable regions of southern Mordor. The presence of orcs in pre-Sauron Mordor also merits consideration, although Tolkien doesn't explicitly mention them dwelling there before the Dark Lord's arrival. Orcs species existed since the First Age, having been bred by Morgoth from corrupted elves. It's possible that scattered bands took refuge in Mordor's mountains after their masters' defeat, drawn to the shadow and isolation. The region offered the most tantalizing possibility concerns the forgotten beasts, creatures from the dark corners of Arda's creation that survived into later ages, just as Shelob made her home in Mordor's passes. Other ancient and nameless creatures might have lurked in its deeper valleys and caves. Tolkien's world is populated with beings like the Watcher in the Water and the nameless things beneath Moria. That Gandalf encountered remnants of an earlier world that found homes in places untouched by the light of the Valar. In his letter, number 144, Tolkien mentions that there are other things more ancient in the world than Sauron, creatures from before the world was made. Some of these primordial beings might have found in Mordor's volcanic landscape a reminder of the world's fiery birth, made their homes there long before the coming of elves or men. Conclusion: land that waited as we piece together the fragments of law and evidence. A clearer picture of Presser Mordor emerges, not a blank slate waiting to be defined, but a land with its own ancient character and purpose. Mordor, before Sauron, was a place of stark duality. Its northwest was a volcanic wasteland dominated by Orodruin's smoldering presence, a wound in the world left by Melor's primordial discord. Its southeast was surprisingly fertile, with rivers feeding into Lake Nunnan and soil enriched by volcanic minerals. It was neither paradise lost nor hell incarnate, but something more complex, a land shaped by the same forces that forged all of Middle-earth, yet marked by extremes that set it apart. It was a natural fortress, enclosed by mountains that predated any Dark Lord's designs. These mountains didn't merely defend, they isolated. They created a pocket of Middle-earth, cut off from the light and influence of the Valar. And the elves, a place where ancient shadows could linger undisturbed. The name itself, Mordor, the Black Land, speaks to how it was perceived by the free peoples long before Sauron claimed it, whether named for its black volcanic rock or some deeper spiritual darkness. It was already a place approached with caution, skirted rather than traversed. Mordor wasn't corrupted by Sauron. It was completed by him. He recognized in its geography, its isolation, and its primal fire, a reflection of his own nature and ambitions in Orduin's flames. He found the perfect forge for his greatest work. Its mountains. He saw walls that needed only fortification. In its fertile south. He discovered lands that could sustain his armies. So what was Mordor before Sauron? It was a warning, unheeded, a scar on the face of Middle-earth that spoke of earlier wounds and ancient discord. It was a place where Mellor's influence had left its mark, creating not evil itself, but conditions favorable to it, a spiritual and physical landscape receptive to darkness. Sauron didn't transform Mordor against its nature. Fulfilled what was already written in its bones, where others saw desolation. He saw potential in the end. Mordor before and after Sauron tells us something profound about Tolkien's understanding of evil, that it doesn't create so much as it distorts. Mordor was always the black land. Sauron simply made it more fully itself, amplifying the darkness that was already there and neglecting the glimpse of life it offered. And perhaps that is the most chilling truth of all, that the seeds of darkness were already sown, the very foundations of the world, waiting only for the right hand to cultivate them.